So this is a woodshed that we built a couple years ago, and we had crushed concrete on the floor. And on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, I worked pretty much overnight to remove the crushed concrete to make a pile of it and get it out of here. Although I had every intention of filming the tractor in the barn removing the crushed concrete, it was just very late. I worked one night until 2 in the morning and the other night until 3:30 in the morning to get it done. And this was kind of the aftermath. I had dust so thick at times I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And you can see the tractor is really covered in a thick coat of dust at this point. And this is most of what's left. Some of it we had to use to fill in the ruts from the cement trucks that they left behind. And today we're going to be moving the crushed concrete over to the driveway to grade it out and finish up the project. Now last week a customer came in and told me that they got a quote from Kubota, and Kubota was selling them on this BX23S Tlb, tractor loader backhoe. The customer was told by the Kubota salesperson that this is identical to and will perform just as well as the 1025 Tlb. Now it just so happened that we have two Kubota BX23s and one BX2680 on our lot, and I work for a great company, and they allowed me to take one of these home to go ahead and do a test against the 1025 that I have, which is the 2018. Now this one is a 2023 Kubota with only 37 hours on it. The BX23S is the only subcompact tractor that Kubota makes with the tractor loader backhoe specifications. If you wanted to add a backhoe to the BX2680, you can't. Other than the 1025R cab and the 2025R cab, you can put a backhoe on any of our subcompact tractors. So for the purpose of this recording, there's going to be just a tiny slight delay so that you can see that I'm actually filming with two cameras at the same time. One is on the RPMs on the tractor and the other is on the performance of the tractor. To be fair to Kubota, I am not completely familiar with this machine. The very first thing that I struggled with a little bit was the level indicator they have on top of the bucket, because it's not an actual rod like it is on the 1025, and you have to figure out the angle of the bucket, and you can see that when I'm starting into the pile it actually goes into the ground. So I will make several approaches at 1800 RPM just to make sure that I'm being fair to Kubota. When I notice that the bucket is driving into the ground, I back off and I do my best to level the bucket to the ground. And then I'm going to lower it back to the ground and kind of approach it how I would with the 1025, and try and go straight into the pile. In order to run the backhoe and the loader on the Kubota, you have to be at a minimum of 1800 RPM, and you can see that indicated by the orange and yellow bar that starts right at 1800 RPMs and goes up to 4000 RPMs. At 1800 RPM, I could not get the Kubota to drive further into the pile of rock, and I also could not get the bucket to lift out of the rock. Go back and look at the 1800 all over again. In fact, I encourage you to look at this several times. I really tried to be as fair as I could with this entire video. So one of the decisions I made fairly early in videotaping was that with my inexperience with the Kubota, I was going to make this into a 2-day film festival. I was going to go ahead and do the Kubota first on the first day with the John Deere second, and on the second day I was going to do the John Deere first and have the Kubota second. Each day I did my best to keep the conditions similar. In fact, in this case, Kubota actually has an advantage here because I'm really not digging into the pile. I'm in a very small pile on the outside fringe of the larger pile. On the Kubota there were two things I struggled with, and one was the level indicator, and the second is the throttle is kind of sticky, so you got to kind of really work it to get it into place. And when I started this off, I was only at 1900 RPM thinking I was at 2000 RPM, and right when I try and go into the ground again, you're going to see that the bucket goes straight into the ground I really struggled with that level indicator, and I made several approaches at the same RPM. Like right now it's back into the ground again. So and then I caught that it was at only 1900 RPM, so I bumped it up to get it to 2000 RPM. So you can watch three things here. You can watch the RPM of the tractor, you can watch my foot, which is going back and forth, and you can hear the engine going up and down as I push on the pedal, and then you can see my hand is pulling back on the joystick. Now Kubota touts that you can lift and curl their bucket at the same time, and that was not my experience. In fact, my experience was that you could actually only do one function at a time, either lift or curl, and I found that I had most success curling and not lifting, and then backing out of the pile, and then I'd be able to lift. And to be clear about something else, if the bucket is going to the ground, it's not going into heavy clay. We're going into sand. And if you watch my other videos, you're going to see that I've talked about that I live on sand. I live on the edge of a lake that used to be a part of the Grand Kankakee. We're basically a Lake Michigan spillway. We are in sand out here, and the fact that the Kubota in four-wheel drive and low gear is struggling to even get through that is kind of surprising. Now you can really see that I'm trying to get the loader to come up. I'm pushing into the pile. You can see the RPMs on the tractor. Every time that I try and lift it out of the pile, the RPMs go down. And I'm only able to lift that bucket out of the pile of dirt if I curl first and then lift up. And in most cases, I have to back out of the pile and lift in order to get the bucket to lift up. And here again, I'm going back into the ground a little bit, but I did on this one have more success of going into the pile and getting a little bit more, and I was actually able to rock it forward and push at the same time by curling and pushing and curling and pushing and curling and pushing and curling, and then finally I'm able to lift. So I kind of alternated between curling, pushing, and lifting, and then I was able to get my first full bucket load of dirt. And at this point, I think I kind of figured out the tractor a little bit better. I mean, obviously I'm at a higher RPM, and I figured out that I had to keep the bucket above the ground, and I couldn't really ride the ground and dig into the pile. And I also figured out that in order to get the dirt into the crushed concrete into the bucket, I had to level the bucket, push forward, curl up, then drive forward a little bit more, and then curl up. You can see the tires are spinning, curl up, and then you're going to see me drive back into the pile, doing the same technique, curl up, curl up, curl up, and then push forward, and then pull it up in the air. And at that point, I felt like I had figured out the tractor and was going to try it at the next level just to see what we're going to come up with at this point. And I know this video is a little longer than most of them, but that's because I wanted to make sure that I did not cut the video, I did not speed up the video, and I didn't do anything that would make people think that I am hiding anything that happened. This is just one long video that we're going through to show what the tractor can do. So now that I was able to successfully go into the pile 3 times and get a full bucket load of dirt, I felt like I had figured out the best way to work with the Kubota, and that is it's a little slower progress into the pile and inching forward and picking up that load of dirt. But I did feel like I was able to get a full load of dirt each time I went to the pile after that. So now I'm at 3,000 RPM, and I'm figuring I'm just going to be able to drive into the pile, push in, and then lift and curl at the same time and be able to get a full bucket like I would with my tractor. And I was able to drive further into the pile. You can see that the bucket is all the way into the rock pile now, but I can't lift the bucket out. And this was something that surprised me because I figured the hydraulics would take over because of the higher RPM. And I really had to back out each time with this and then lift it and kind of scrape the top of the pile to get that out. So that really surprised me. So I figured maybe the ground is causing an issue, so I wanted to level that back off before I went back into the pile. Leveling the ground is another thing with the bucket that I'm not used to, and definitely didn't do as good of a job as I wanted to on that. But driving back into the pile, kind of experienced the same issues. You see I actually have to keep backing out and then scraping the edge of the pile to get a full load of dirt. So I figured that I had worn some holes into the ground and that was impacting the performance of the tractor, so I moved over to a clean path where I wouldn't have to deal with the loose dirt and the holes. And right away I got into the pile really good with the higher RPMs, but now I can't lift it out of the ground. You can see I'm trying to rock it back and forth. I'm trying to use the same technique that I was, but I actually had to back the tractor out of the pile because it couldn't handle the full load of rock. Now, this is a quick attach bucket, and Kubota specs it as being able to lift 613 pounds with a quick attach, and with their rigid bucket that they have, they say that that's 739 pounds. And it appears that their quick attach style bucket is basically a skid steer bucket, and I was trying to figure out what the weight of that bucket is, but it really doesn't tell me in their specs. So makes it a little bit hard to know exactly why the rigid bucket lifts more than this one does, but clearly this bucket struggles to get it out, and this is a much smaller bucket than the 1025 is, and I'm going to show you a demonstration of that here in a little bit. Now I'm trying to be more conscientious about driving it like I would my 1025, approaching it with the same speed, thinking that maybe I'm going too slow into the pile, so I'm going to come at a moving getting into the pile, moving, and then curling as I go. This was the most effective way I found of getting a full load of rock and kind of scraping the edge of the pile rather than going in and doing a complete load. And I did play with lowering the load down, trying to keep it smooth on the way down, and I'm not really jumping it down to the ground at this point. It's more of me getting used to the tractor and understanding how the hydraulics are going to work on it. And at this point, I think we have a pretty good idea of how the tractor is going to operate. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the 1025. Idle. We're at idle. Low gear. Now, for clarification, we're starting at 1500 RPM when we started the Kubota at 1800 RPM. And you're going to hear the engine's going to shudder, but then it's going to push through that pile and lift up a full bucket load, which is a much larger bucket than the Kubota is, at idle. Now let's try 1800 RPM, which is their RPM that they can start at. 1800 RPM. 1800 1,500 RPM, the tractor is able to dig into the pile, and we aren't scraping the surface of it. We're able to push into it and up and get a full bucket on the very first try once again. And remember, at 1,800 RPM, their tractor would not push into the pile and it would not lift out a load of rock.
2,000 RPM.
And here you see I went in on the bottom of the pile and I was not able to get it out without backing out the tractor a little bit. At 2,000 RPM, I was able to drive further into the pile, which is similar to what Kubota had done, but I still was able to drive through the pile and lift it up, just backing it out slightly before lifting it up. So at 2,500 RPM, I decided I'm going to go ahead and dip the bucket into the ground like I did with the Kubota and see if it'll come out. You can see I dug in, got underneath the pile, and I do get held up a little bit here, but I'm going to use the same technique. You can see that I'm curling as I'm pushing in, and I'm still able to get a full bucket load and then back out of the pile pretty easily. And you can see the clumps of grass and dirt hanging off the edge of the bucket. That shows that I went into the ground when I lifted up that pile. One of the things I do want to point out too is that the pile is changing shape as we're going into it, and I'm stacking it deeper, and I'm actually going into a more vertical pile as we go along as opposed to a horizontal pile, which is impacting the way the tractor lifts out, but it still is able to lift out of the pile and move on. And this one, I think I even drive into the pile and I'm able to climb the pile with my load as I lift it out of the ground, and you can see, and I was never able to do that with a Kubota at all. And you can see at the 2,500, the 3,000, and 3,500 RPM, Deere did dig into the pile much deeper, and we were able to overcome by continuing to push into the pile. As you recall, the Kubota could not push into the pile, and I don't think the Kubota would have climbed on top of the pile like the Deere did with a full load. And right now I'm lifting it up and down, and you can see that on the way down it's just as smooth as it was on the way up. Just to be clear, the Kubota and the John Deere are not lifting the same weight. The Kubota is much smaller at 48 inches. You can see the depth of the bucket is much smaller. The capacity of the bucket is lower as well. The John Deere bucket is 53 inches wide as opposed to the Kubota 48 inches wide. One of the other things I want to point out about my tractor is at 5.5 years old, you're going to notice that the loader bucket actually is drifting down and it needs to be repaired. So we've been doing all that lifting with a loader that is not entirely functional right now and is drifting at this point. So I want to point out something, that right now we have a flat, level load of dirt. It's not a heaping pile of dirt, and I'm going to fill up the Kubota bucket at this point. And you're going to see that the John Deere more than fills it up to a heaping pile, and there's plenty of spillover onto the ground around it, and that's because the Deere just holds so much more than the Kubota. And for people that are operating the Kubota, that means that you're going to be making more trips, and it's going to take you longer to get a full load than it does with the Deere. And as you look around the bucket on the ground, you can see how much has actually spilled over and is laying on the ground outside of the Kubota. And as we dump the Kubota load back into Deere, you're going to find that the Deere bucket will hold the capacity of the loader. And even though my bucket's going to drift down here, it's going to hold that whole load up from the Kubota with no issues. And by the way, if you watch any of my grapple bucket videos, you probably understand how I might have damaged that loader valve, causing it to drift down as it is right now. And there it is, no tricks, no gimmicks. The John Deere bucket simply holds so much more than the Kubota quick attach bucket does. And with that, we're going to bring day one's filming of the John Deere 1025 Tlb versus the BX23S to a close. Now I realize that I'm not as experienced as a Kubota operator, and that a more experienced operator would probably be able to get the Kubota to perform better than I was able to. However, I think most of that smoothed out a little bit on the second day of filming, and you're going to see that as well. In addition to the tests that we ran today, tomorrow we are also going to use the tractor in a practical application, and that is hauling crushed concrete a long distance down the driveway to grade up my driveway. And you're going to see how well the Kubota performs versus the 1025R at both time savings and the amount of the load that it can haul at the same time. Now I realize that there are going to be a lot of people that are going to be upset as they watch this video, and that's not my intention. Hopefully, as you're watching it, you can see I try to be fair to the Kubota, and that's why I'm going to do a second video of day 2 of filming. And at the same time, the biggest thing I would like you to do is, if you are considering buying a Kubota and a Deere, go out and try them both out. See it for yourself, test them, see what it will do. Run the hydraulics at idle on the Kubota, run the hydraulics at idle on the Deere, and see what it's going to do for you. Again, I want to thank everybody for watching today's video here at Everything Green Tractors. I really appreciate the support. If you like today's video, please hit that like and subscribe button. I'm sure there's a few people that didn't care for today's video, but hopefully you see that I've been trying to give it a fair treatment of the Kubota tractor. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the John Deere tractor, please contact me at the everythinggreentractors.com website. Once again, thank you so much for watching. And I'm Phil Dance, and I sell John Deere tractors.